There are a lot of people out there who find enjoyment in visiting remote part of the world for the sake of exploring the beauty of nature. But sometimes the unexpected could happen, forcing your body to do what it takes in order to survive the threatening circumstance. In today's video, we'll be looking at 5 cases where people have survived crazy events against all odds. Number 5. In 1972, on the 13th of October, a Uruguayan rugby team, along with their families and friends, were flying from Montevideo, Uruguay to Santiago, Chile. It was a regular flight for the team and crew, but this time it would end up as one of the most catastrophic survival incidents in history. The plane crashed into the Andes Mountains near the border of Chile and Argentina. The crash site was about 3,600 meters above sea levels, so you can imagine how cold it must have been. Out of a total of 45 passengers, 12 died on impact, including 2 members of the crew that fell to their death from the plane. The morning after the crash, an additional 5 people died from the injuries, and 1 more death a couple days later. The remaining survivors had lots of trouble surviving as they had almost no equipment that would help them against extreme temperatures. They had lack of oxygen and very little food, which included typical in-flight snacks like chocolate, nuts, wine, and other beverages. They had so little food that they resorted to cannibalism. They ate the dead passengers to stay alive, keeping in mind that all the passengers were friends and knew one another. There was also an avalanche that struck the plane a couple weeks after the crash, which killed an additional 8 people. Later on, the survivors thought that the only way to survive was to trek through the mountains to reach the Chilean countryside. In order to keep warm during this trek, they improvised a sleeping bag by stitching together patches of clothing and blankets. Once they reached the top of the mountain, they concluded that this trek would take a lot longer than they expected. They sent back 1 person to the crash site and the other 2 pushed on. Eventually, the 2 trekkers were successful in a search of the Chilean countryside and humans. They sent help back to the site, and once the survivors were rescued, they were sent to the Santiago hospital where they were treated for scurvy, frostbite, altitude sickness, malnutrition, and broken limbs. Only 16 of the original 45 passengers survived. Number 4. Harrison Okene was a Nigerian sailor and cook on a Jascon 4 tugboat. He was the sole survivor of the tugboat sinking. What makes the story so unbelievable is that Harrison managed to survive underwater for nearly 3 days by crouching in a 4-foot air pocket. He says that one day at around 5 a.m., the boat just started sinking extremely fast. He tried to get to the emergency exit but failed, and watched in fear as his fellow crew members were swept off the boat and into the cold sea. He took shelter in a 4-foot air bubble in the boat's cabin. He stood in that air bubble for about 60 hours, 30 meters or approximately 100 feet underwater. The salt water started to peel his skin and he suffered from paranoia and nightmares. After a little while, a search party started, which hadn't started earlier as the searchers justifiably thought that the crew members were all dead, and they found Harrison. There are videos of Harrison's rescue. We've linked them in the description box for you guys to see. Harrison says that what kept him a little happier while he was stuck in the boat is that he got to enjoy his favorite soup dish, a fish and palm fruit soup. He also says that he would like to write a book about his survival story, so keep an eye out. Number 3. Ricky McGee was traveling across his home country of Australia on January 23rd in order to start a new job. He was driving through the Australian outback when he saw a group of Aboriginal people struggling with their car. Ricky got out of the vehicle to help the man, and while he was doing so, he was not only mugged but drugged as well. When he woke up, he no longer had his shoes and had just been left with his shorts and shirts, and he also had no food or water. Also, it is important to mention that he woke up in a hole in the ground. He was pretty much left out to die. Once Ricky found out about what had happened to him, he started hiking around his area so he can find food and water and a way to get back to civilization. He wouldn't find water for 2 days and food for another 6. For his first 2 days, he was forced to drink his own urine to keep himself hydrated. Ricky says that the first thing he ate was a lizard he had killed. Ricky also experimented with different plants and flowers for nutrition, and also many insects, including caterpillars, grasshopper, stick bugs, leeches, and cockroaches. He also ate frogs, and he camped out at many locations for large amounts of time, the largest being 7 weeks. 71 days after the incident, he was rescued. and weighed about 60 kilograms less. That's approximately 132 pounds. When he got back, he said that no one believed his story, so he wrote a book about it, explaining the details of his struggle. It was sold in multiple countries. It is a miracle that he's still alive today. Number 2. On July 9, 1958, Howard Earlridge and his son Sonny went for an evening boat ride in Lutaya Bay. They thought it would be a regular, relaxing ride, but it turned out to be the complete opposite. Around 2 hours into their ride, they heard a large rumbling sound coming from the edge of the bay, from one of the mountains. The sounds died down, but when Howard looked back, he says he saw what resembled an atomic bomb blow up in the water. This was the tallest ever recorded tsunami, a mega tsunami. This tsunami was taller than the Empire State Building. After the initial impact, a great tsunami came their way, or as Howard described it, a wall of water. After seeing this, he threw his son a life preserver and said, "Start praying." Instead of the wave destroying their boat on impact, it was brought up on top of the tsunami for approximately 25 to 35 minutes. They were carried above ground and above the trees. They were swept back into the bay and they got back to land. 2 other boats, however, were not so lucky. Those boats were swept into the open sea where they were destroyed. Number 1. These are the stories of Frane Salak, a Croatian music teacher. His story starts off in 1962 on a train headed from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik. While heading over a bridge, the train derailed and went directly into a freezing river. Many passengers died, but Frane did not. He managed to swim to the shore with a broken arm and hypothermia. The next part of the story occurs in 1963, only a year after, in a small flight. The small plane's engine stopped working and the plane started to head straight down to the ground. While this was happening, Frane was in the back of the plane talking to the stewardess. Just his luck, the plane crashed into the side of the hill, killing everybody on board, but Frane somehow survived by landing on a haystack. In 1965, Frane was on a bus in the wintertime. The road was so icy that the bus went straight to the railing and crashed. 4 people died, but Frane did not. In 1968, he was teaching his youngest son on how to shoot a gun, and he was able to do so, but he shot himself, but survived. After that, in 1970, he was driving his car when his engine caught on fire. He jumped out of his car just in time as the car exploded when he got out. The next moment also involved a car fire and happened in 1973. He was driving his new car when the ventilation system started blowing fire into his face, and he survived. In 1995, he got hit by a bus, but survived. In 1996, a United Nations truck hit his car off the side of the cliff, and it exploded at the bottom of the cliff, but somehow he was able to survive again. You most likely think that he's the world's most unluckiest man, but in 2003, he bought a lottery ticket and won the jackpot of a total of $1 million. All of his stories earned Frane the name of the world's unluckiest man. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, give it a big thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to us for more updates.